When and how should a wife submit to her husband? Submission, the biblical way, on this slice of fresh bread. Welcome to Fresh Bread, a podcast ministry of Grace Bible Church, Gainesville, with Pastor Brandon and Pastor Keith. Well, thanks for clicking on Fresh Bread. Fresh Bread, where we're bringing the truth of God's Word to a starving world. Fresh Bread Podcast 90. And we are going to do a Fresh Bread on a topic that was big, I think 2 weeks ago. It kind of exploded on the Christian internet circles. I've heard many people talking about it. In fact, on our way to the GBC Christmas party, my wife just out of the blue said, "Hey, would you ever ask me to wear a red dress for a week?" And I said, "What are you talking about?" So I don't know if you guys have heard the red dress question. I think it was started by Tom Buck. And I'm Pastor Keith. He's Pastor Brandon. Doug Wilson gets blamed for a lot of that stuff.
Yeah, well, there's a connection.
Oh, there is?
There is a connection. And he didn't start it. Matter of fact, Tom Buck, in 2020, he was talking about the mask mandates. So the government mandating masks. And he used the example. So he was saying that the government was outside of its realm of authority, its sphere of authority. And so he was saying he used the example of a husband saying that the woman should wear a red dress every day. And he was trying to use that as an illustration of why it's not right for the government to mandate masks in that way, and so that they were outside of their sphere of authority. And so he used it as an illustration. And that was the first mention of the red dress. I don't think at the time, I think the emphasis at that point was on the mask mandates and whether or not it was just for the government to mandate or right within their sphere of authority to mandate masks. And so, but then more recently, he brought the question back up, and he posted it. He posted it on X, on Twitter.
Okay.
And so let me just give you the actual question that he asked on Twitter. He asked or posed this question: if a husband tells his wife that he wants her to wear a red dress every day, is she to submit to his authority and obey? So that's the question.
Okay. And that just kind of took off on the internet. Chris LeDuc and was Doug Wilson involved in it as well?
Well, Doug Wilson, I don't know if I didn't read anything with Doug Wilson directly involved, but indirectly he said he was talking about kind of the Abigail principle, and with David and Abigail, and how Abigail went to David because of what her husband's doing, and that there is a principle of taking something like that to the elders. And so it's a kind of a side issue or a tangent to the whole discussion of the red dress.
So what's the correct answer?
Well,
should a wife wear a red dress if the husband asks her to wear a red dress? And is there is there like something that goes deeper to this than what I'm thinking? Maybe, like, is it the submission part is whatever the man says goes, or
no? Well, no. But in terms of that, your question, it's not a whatever the man says goes type of scenario, or it shouldn't be, but it is a nuanced answer, and I think just on the face of it, if the man is just giving, some arbitrary command, like wear a red dress, and he doesn't have any real reason behind it, I was thinking of a scenario like if you lived in a Muslim country and your wife wanted to go out and wear, regular American attire, you might say to your wife, "No, I want you to wear something that is more in line with the culture, because I don't want you to put a target on your back." And, she should, even though that goes against her fashion sense, she should obey, submit, better word. better biblical word for this, but she should submit and do it because it's for her safety. Like he has a reason to say do that. And another example might be your wife is taking the kids on a walk around the street, and you may be someone who's very cautious, and you say to your wife, I want you to wear a yellow vest. I want you, so that you can be seen, because I want to make sure that drivers see you. Does that, that may be a fashion problem, right? I mean, in terms of that, she may not want to be seen in a yellow vest, but she should submit in that case because it's for her safety. Like it's something that actually he has a reason behind it, that's rational. Whereas like the red dress situation is irrational. Like there's no, in and of itself, it's irrational, whether it's red dress or blue dress or yellow dress or white pants or whatever, toe sack. There's nothing rational about it in and of itself. And so I think that is outside of his realm of authority or his sphere of authority, to be arbitrary that way.
So what is the difference between submission and obeying? Are they the same thing?
Well, I think they're very similar for sure. I know, Chris LeDuc, you just mentioned earlier, he brought out that, with Paul, he says, Ephesians 5:21 that, we are to submit to one another. But then in Ephesians 6:1, it says, children, obey your parents in the Lord. But then there's also, I think that's what says with the slave, to obey the master. And there does seem to be a nuanced difference of the children have, with children, because of immaturity, they don't have as much recourse. Like they don't have the ability, especially at younger ages, they don't have as much of an ability to negotiate. Now, we should teach our children over time to how to properly negotiate. And so, because we don't want them, when they're 17 years old, you shouldn't still be at a position where you're dictating everything they do. You brush your teeth at 6:00, you eat this time and this time and this time, and you don't eat this and you eat this. And we shouldn't be that. We should be letting them, at that point, they should be making some of their own decisions. So there would be more of a submission idea, whereas obedience seems to be more rigid. There seems to be a more rigid, like it's like you obey, you do what you're told kind of idea.
A wife is to submit, but not obey. Children are to obey.
Well, no, it's a nuanced difference, because there is obedience in submission. Submission literally, biblically, means to line oneself under their authority. So okay. You're lining yourself up under one's authority. I'm to submit. Well, I'm to obey the Lord because I'm, because what he says, what his commands say, the commands he gives is right. And so there is a nuanced difference, but they're very similar. There is an obedience in submission. That's there for sure. But it's that submit as to the Lord part that really we have to recognize, is that I'm submitting to my husband. If I'm a woman, I'm submitting to my husband because I'm submitting to my Lord, and I want to obey him and please him. And so it's not because my husband has some, in and of himself has, some authority that isn't God given. Christ gives him that authority. Christ has delegated that authority, and so his expectation of that man is to lead in a way that is pleasing to the Lord. And as far as his wife submitting to him, she is to submit to him as to the Lord, which basically means that in simple terms, it means that if the husband is asking the wife to do something sinful, she doesn't have to obey that. Like she's not under any requirement to obey that. And so yet, even in that, she ought to exhibit a submissive attitude. Like her desire ought to be to obey, even in a situation where the man doesn't deserve it. Now, I'm not saying she should, if the man doesn't, when I say doesn't deserve it, what I mean is that he's asking her to sin. But her heart attitude should be to submit, anyway. And so, again, there's a I want to be careful because I'm not saying that she should have a desire to sin, but she should have a desire to submit. And the only way that she can submit is if he's not in sin himself. Like so her desire should be that he wouldn't be in sin, that he wouldn't be asking her to do sinful things so that she could properly submit to him.
So what comes first? I'm just trying to nail this down from my own mind. Submission, then obeying, or is it obeying, then submitting? Or are they at the same time?
Well, I think, again...
Is it a step?
Well, no. I mean, I don't know about a step. I don't know how to even answer that question except to say that submission should be sort of a heart attitude.
Okay.
I'm lining myself up under your authority. And as part of that, then I'm going to obey you if what you're telling me is not sinful. So that should be, the submission should be a heart attitude of lining oneself up under that authority. So as an example, I'm under your authority as an elder. Like I'm lining, even though as a fellow elder, I'm not, as a fellow elder, I have the same authority as you do, right? But in my own life, you have an authority over me as my elder. And so I need to submit to that authority. Now that authority there's a sphere of authority. I mean, there's certain things that you can't do. I mean, there's certain things you can't tell me to do and that I would have to obey. But, I do need to have a submissive attitude towards you. I do need to have an attitude of submission, which part of that is obeying where I need to obey. Now, obedience, there seems to be more rigidness with obedience that there's a command and I need to obey that command. Like, that there no questions asked. I need to obey that command. And, like a child, think of a 3-year-old child who runs out in the street. That child needs to be trained such that if I tell that child to stop, there's no questions. They stop, right? It needs to be obedience to that level. And I don't know, the husband-wife situation, I don't think that's not how it works.
Right. It's different between a parent and a child and a husband and wife.
Yes.
But you just answered the question. I mean, I appreciate that because it's submission comes first and then obey comes second. That's what it sounds like, which makes sense to me. That's why I was just trying to nail that down. So when we look at a husband and wife situation, should a wife submit to a husband who's not loving her the way Christ loves the church, or does that not matter?
Well, now you're getting into, so you asked me whether or not he has the authority to make her wear a red dress in an arbitrary fashion. And I would say the answer to that specific question is no. He doesn't have that authority, that he is usurping authority that he doesn't have because especially because of the arbitrary nature of it. It's just his own whim. And so now on the other side of it, that's now you're getting a different dynamic. And this is probably where, a lot of our listeners would know that, my wife's submitted that question, that very question to the ladies. And there was a lot of back and forth over, the point of view of the woman and what she should do. And my short answer is that there needs to be submission. Like there needs to be an attitude of submission. And so, in a situation like that, where it's an arbitrary red dress situation, he is being unloving. Like to ask his wife to do something that's so arbitrary and assuming, many women, love to, dress up and, that's something that they want to dress up and, wear a nice dress and, they want to do those things and, they like to fix their hair and, do those things. And I know there's different women and different attitudes that way, but by and large, generally speaking, they enjoy that. And so to be so dictatorial and I've actually heard more, I think that's an arbitrary thing, but I've heard of men dressing their wives. Yes. I don't mean physically dressing their wives. I mean, laying out their, helping or picking out their clothes, what clothes they're going to wear, and even picking out the suit, what they're going to wear for the day. I've heard men do that, and I don't think that's being loving. I don't think that that's a loving gesture because, could it be loving? Yes. I mean, if that's what the wife wants, like she says, you know what, honey, that's just not something that I care about. And if it were me, I'd put on a toe sack and I just, whatever's functional, and I wouldn't care, but I know you care. So why don't you help me pick my clothes? Why don't you show me what you want me to wear on a daily basis? Because I just don't care. Okay. Well, that's not unloving. I mean, could be very well a loving thing to do. I mean, because she wants to please you, and she knows that what she would normally want to wear is not something that would be pleasing. That's not unloving. That's actually loving, I believe. But if you if you're like most of us and are married to a woman who actually has the ability and wants to pick out her own clothes and wants to deal with her own fashion, then no, it's not loving. Now, I will say that I'm not talking about helping your wife find clothes that are not sexually explicit. Like, you should be as a husband making sure that your wife is not causing problems, in terms of what she's wearing. And so there are definitely clothes that I would not want my wife wearing, right? There's things that I wouldn't want her wearing, and especially in certain contexts. So something that may be totally acceptable here with just me is completely different than what I would want her to wear, off site, in public. And so, yeah, that's not unloving, and that's within the realm of within my sphere of authority to help her, make those decisions in that way. So I hope that, it's nuanced for sure, but yeah. So going back to, well, does that answer your question?
Yeah, you did. Not totally the second one, but you did say something before when you were starting that a husband does not have the authority to ask his wife to wear a red dress for a week, right?
Well, it's not for a week, just wear a red dress.
Yeah. But if he does, and you said she should have a heart to want to submit.
Yes.
Would she say, okay, I'll wear it 2 days a week or?
No, well, okay. I think that this is where it gets a little bit gnarly, because what should be her response? So let's just say that the husband says, okay, I want you to wear a red dress every day. And she says, or, I guess the question then becomes, how does she respond to that?
Right.
I don't think that she has to respond by just being a robot and saying, I have to just obey. Like I need to just, if he says do it, I do it. And this there was actually a post on Twitter or X where a guy said, if I tell my wife to wear a red dress, she will wear it. And that's, like over and out, full stop. This is what will happen kind of idea. And I don't think that's not a godly attitude. And I don't think your wife is like that. I don't think your wife has to do that. Like, I don't think that she's responsible to obey you in that way. Now, I think, but where it gets gnarly is, how does the wife respond? Like, how does she respond? And I think what we have to remember is there's a way to respond that is justice, like dominated by justice. Like I'm thinking justice, and there's another way to respond where I'm thinking about sanctification. Let me give you the justice. The justice is, he's wrong, I'm not doing it. So because it's unjust to ask her to do it. And nobody would disagree that it's unjust, right? I mean, It is. If he arbitrarily says you should wear a red dress, or I want you to wear a red dress, and you will wear a red dress, that is an unjust request or unjust command. Okay?
It's weird.
Yes, it's unjust. But in the response, I need to be careful not to be if I'm a wife and I'm in that position, I need to be careful not to be responding, with justice in mind. Like, it's unjust for him to do this. And so therefore I'm going to respond in this way. I'm going to boycott him, or I'm going to do whatever to get back at him, or I'll wear the red dress, but I'm going to wear the ugliest red dress I can find in this world. And so I don't think that's the proper response. Mm-hmm. Okay. Now, so what is the proper response? Well, I mentioned justice, and then I mentioned sanctification. what is the ultimate goal? What is the ultimate goal for the relationship? And what is the ultimate goal for you as a person? And what is the ultimate goal for my husband if I'm in that position? And so I need to ask myself, what is the ultimate goal? Well, the ultimate goal is, as a couple, that we would grow as a couple. Like we would grow in our understanding and love for one another. Our relationship would grow deeper in time. So that's that. And then what's the goal for my husband? Well, the goal for my husband is to grow in godliness. I want him to be sanctified. I want him to grow in godliness. And then so what's the goal for myself? Well, ultimately the same thing. I want to grow in godliness. So what should be my response if I want to grow and if I want those things to happen? If I want my relationship to grow, I want my husband to grow, and I want to grow. What should be my response? Well, it's not a justice response, right? Mm-hmm. That's first and foremost. So I think it starts with an attitude of being submissive. Like I want to be, my attitude is that I want to, so my husband says, I want you to wear a red dress. I want you to wear a red dress every day. And I this is it. Okay. So I think the answer should be, honey, I want to please you. You know that my desire is to submit and to obey you where you're not asking me to sin. I'm not saying that it is not sinful for me to wear a red dress every day. It's not, right? But it is unloving to ask me to do something that I wouldn't want to do. It is unloving to ask me that, even though it's not sin. Now, if it's sin, it's clear cut, right? There's no question. But it's unloving for you to ask me that. The Word of God says that you ought to love me as Christ loved the church. And Christ doesn't give arbitrary commands to the church, right? And so I would argue, and I would submit to you that you're giving me an arbitrary command. And I will obey you, but I want you to know that this is not what we should be doing, what I should be doing, or what you should be asking me to do. Now, this is where it gets into, and this is what, again, it's kind of gnarly because you're giving advice, and not everybody's in a good church, not everybody has good elders, not everybody, so a lot of people would say, well, you need to go to the elders. Okay, I don't disagree with that. I'm talking about the wife. The wife needs to go to the elders against her husband. And that's where the whole Abigail thing comes in, that Abigail went to David. And so, but I would say that she needs to be careful with that, right? Because now you're airing the family's dirty laundry to the public, and she needs to be careful, and that needs to be a nuanced conversation. Do I think that the elders should be mature and helpful in that way? Absolutely, I do. But I think probably the better way to handle it would be for the wife to implore the husband to go to the elders and ask, to implore the husband to go together if need be, but implore the husband to go together and ask the elders their opinion on that topic. Because I don't want to. Well, I think what I'm afraid of with saying, "Oh, she just needs to go to the elders." What I'm afraid of is that I'm putting myself in a position as an elder to say, I become the arbiter between her and her husband, and they need to learn to work out those things on their own. Now, obviously, if it comes down to a situation where he is asking things that are, when he's asking things that are wrong, then she needs to say no, and she has every right to go and seek counsel in that way. And she has every right to go seek counsel in terms of the red dress. I'm not saying that she shouldn't do that. I'm just saying that she should be trying to win her husband, and she should be trying to bring him to the elders together in a way, again, going back to that justice versus sanctification piece, that I need to be really desiring his sanctification. I want him to grow through this. I want him to come to see that that's an arbitrary, that he's being arbitrary, or he's being tyrannical in what he's asking me to do or commanding me to do. I want him to come to see that for himself. And the truth of the matter is that I know this is probably going to be unpopular, but I think that if she does that, it could very well be that there's a period of time that she needs to wear the red dress. That there is a period, because she's trying to win her husband, that there's a period that she should submit, and not that he has any right to ask it, not that he has the authority to command it, but I think if your desire is to see them sanctified and growing in Christ, then there may be a period of time where you say, okay, you register your complaint, you say, this is wrong, this is, but I'm going to submit because I desire your sanctification. And so, and then I think that might be, I think what you might see is that you win them, and, you win them as opposed to just stonewalling them. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So it's submission and then obeying. So how much do you...
I'm not sure why you're hung up on that. I think that obedience is a part of submission.
Right. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, but I don't think it's like this clear cut, there's a command and then you just obey it. Like,
that's why
because she's not a child.
Right.
Yes.
Exactly. But that's why I wanted to define it better for myself. That submission comes before obedience. But that's what I'm saying, is that you're saying that the wife submits, even if it's for a while, and even if the husband does not have the authority to ask that, she's still going to submit because she's being obedient and she's being loving.
Well, because she's being submissive. But I'm not mandating. Like if I were counsel, I wouldn't be mandating that she needs to. I'm just saying
it's up to her.
It's up to her.
Yeah.
Right. How she handles this. If she decides she wants to go to the elders and thinks that that's the right thing to do, then that's fine. I mean, I wouldn't say she's wrong, but it could very well be that if that she may have to judge for herself, that there could be a season where she needs to submit and obey in that way, and pray for her. I mean, prayer is probably the biggest thing, but pray for her husband that he would come to realize that he is being tyrannical. And so it's gnarly. It's not cut and dried, because I'm not saying that she has to wear the red dress. I'm not saying that she has to take it to the elders. I'm saying that her goal should be, instead of justice, her goal should be sanctification. But it's, the sanctification of the relationship, the sanctification of her husband, and also her sanctification. And so that it very well may mean, for a season, that she would submit and obey in that way. Yeah. But I would certainly not see it as a situation where she has no recourse. I think she does have recourse. I think she has recourse with the Lord in prayer. I think she has recourse with her husband to tell him, that this is tyrannical and arbitrary and unnecessary and immature. I mean, I think that she needs to be submissive in even doing that. But I think she has the ability to say, I don't think you're right in this situation. I don't think that I think that you're being arbitrary. I think you're being tyrannical. But then, I think that she needs to recognize that. And I think her first goal should be to win her husband.
Yeah.
And see her husband sanctified.
So is this a chicken and the egg thing, where the wife submits to the husband and then he loves her more, like the way Christ loves the church? Or is it circular, where the man loves the wife the way Christ loves the church and then she submits to him more? Or is it just, these are both commands for the other?
Well, let's okay. Why are we submitting to why do I submit to my, why does a woman submit to her husband?
Because the Bible says...
Because the Lord said so.
Yeah.
Does the Lord say, submit to your husband if he's in obedience?
It does not.
It does not. So there is no... the qualification is that I submit to him as to the Lord, which I would argue means that if he's asking her to sin, the Lord would never ask her to sin. So if he asks her to sin, then she's okay to say, no, I'm not going to do that. Her submission depends on her relationship with the Lord. It doesn't depend upon him and his worthiness to submit to. In the same way, the husband is called to love the wife. His love for his wife is not negotiable and is not contingent upon whether or not she's being lovely, like she's being someone you can love. And so I'm called to love my wife even if she hates me. I'm called to love my wife even if she treats me like scum. I'm called to love my wife even if she refuses to submit to me. And so on the other hand, the wife is called to submit to her husband even if he's not worthy of it. But she's never asked to sin, right? And I would also want to have the nuance or give the nuance of submitting in an abusive relationship. I would never counsel someone that they need to submit to abuse.
Yeah.
Because that's not, the Lord would never abuse someone, or the Lord would never abuse a wife. And so if he's abusing, then he's doing something that he doesn't have the authority to do. And in that situation, she needs to get away from it, and she's right to get away from it and to refuse to be subject to it.
Yeah. So it doesn't depend on, it's not the chicken and the egg thing.
No.
It's each
Yes.
to obey the Lord.
Yes.
Because we submit to him.
Yes.
So before we did this, I looked up on Google. I asked Google AI, should a wife submit to her husband? And here's what Google AI said. The world says that in a healthy, respectful relationship, a woman should never, and the word never, submit to a man in a way that implies powerlessness or lack of agency. So is that what they think that the Christian marriage is? Is that the wife is powerless or has lack of agency?
Well, and I think that's where we have to be careful as Christians to properly model the marriage relationship, that the wife doesn't lose her ability to be someone who can make her own decisions. Like she's still her she's still her person, like who she is. Now, and I'm not speaking, and there obviously is biblically a one flesh relationship. And so, there's a sense with my wife, in a one flesh relationship, I don't own my body. My wife does. I think Paul even talks about that sexually in 1 Corinthians 7. Mm-hmm. My wife owns my body and I own her body. And so there's a mutuality of that. But that doesn't mean that she loses her personhood, within that marriage. Like my wife is still Angie, and she still can think for herself, and she can make decisions, right? But it's within the context of that one flesh relationship. And she still, the Apostle Peter says that she's a joint heir in the faith, meaning that she's just as much a son of God as I am, firstborn son as I am. And so I need to treat her that way, that I'm going to be held to account to how I treated my wife and how I lived with my life and whether I lived with her in an understanding way.
So the biblical word that they use is helpmate. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a key to understanding the relationship, because from my own experience, is that when I was first married, my wife and I butted heads a lot, how to do things. And then suddenly she began to submit more. But what happened was, when we were butting heads, I pulled away. But as she began to submit more, it actually drew me towards her. Mm. And the relationship became more of I make the final decision, but I also ask her, what do you think? Mm-hmm. What do you think we should do? Think we should move? I remember going to seminary. What do you think? Mm-hmm. Would you think this is the right thing for us to do? And she said, yeah, absolutely. If you feel the Lord's leading you in this way. I would never just say, let's go, we're going to do this and we're going to do that. And I think that's the way God has designed it, is that, like you talked about, our wives are given special gifts, and if it would be foolish for us not to use them, to ask advice and help us along in our lives. Sure. Both of us, each other. So I think that's the way, and God designed it that way, so that when the wife is submitting and the husband is loving, it works so perfectly. Yes. Yeah. And anytime there's problems, it's, like within the marriage, it's going to come down to whether or not the husband is being loving, or on the other side, whether or not the wife is being submissive. And so when you have both going wrong, when the husband doesn't love the wife and she's not being submissive, that's where it really goes off the rails. And so, both should be, biblically, as Christians, if I'm a husband, I have to be, loving my wife. It's not negotiable. It's not negotiable, even if she is not
holding up her end of the bargain. I still have to love her, and I have to love her through it. It's the same way with the wife, and admittedly, it's harder for the wife because she's to submit under authority to a man who doesn't deserve it is very difficult and very humbling. And so I definitely understand that. And so, but again, and so when you get into even, where it's abusive, I would never say that someone, a wife needs to submit to an abusive husband in that way, because I don't think the Lord would have it. Like, I don't think he would have that situation. I think that comes under the ask to the Lord part, where, that he's not acting as a delegate of the Lord, and he's putting her in danger. And I think the Lord would never do that. And so I don't think she needs to submit to that. But short of that, then I think she needs to submit as much as she possibly can,
Would it be unbiblical for a Christian marriage to have the wife kind of run the show and the man sort of step back and be submissive?
Yes. Well, it's the curse, actually. Like,
Okay.
that is the curse, that, he says your desire will be for your husband. And I think I take that to be
rule over him.
Yeah, or he'll rule over you.
Yeah.
Here's how I look at that, and biblically, I think that when you see it even in marriages where the husband sort of puts it in neutral, and the wife desires the authority and she rules the roost, but there's always a point where the man exerts that authority, and where he basically snaps back. And, that could be abuse, or it could be, I'm going to flex my muscles here, and that's unbiblical. It's unbiblical, because he should be leading her at all times. And ultimately, it's funny because, some people, most people don't put this together, but then you put that together with what happened with Adam and Eve, where Eve ate the fruit. That was a leadership issue, that Adam was not leading his wife, and where to say no, this is that's the serpent. That's not he's asking us something that goes against what God said, and we need to get it. We need to say no to that. He didn't do that. He went along with his wife. That actually is the issue, is that Adam went along with his wife as opposed to leading his wife.
Yeah.
So, obviously the sin came from disobeying God, ultimately, that eating from the fruit of the tree. But what led to that would be his lack of leadership.
So is that why when young men are going into marriage, it's important that they realize the fact that they are going to have to take the reins and be a leader?
I think that's what is going on right now, is that there's so much feminism in the culture, and so many people that are saying women rule, and it's like hear me roar kind of attitude, that I think that there is a subculture, especially in Christianity, where the men are saying no, we're not going to do that. But I think the problem is they're taking it too far. That they're being tyrannical in nature, instead of understanding that there is that it's more complicated than that. It's not just a responsibility to rule over my wife. It's certainly not a responsibility to rule over in an ungodly way. But I need to be a man that she wants to submit to, because I love her in a way like Christ loves the church. And that is much more difficult and much harder to attain to than I'm just going to dictate. It's interesting because when I first became a Christian, I don't know what our marriage would have been like if we hadn't come to Christ, other than I think it wouldn't have worked. But when I became a Christian, I realized that I had a like this mandate to lead my wife. But I took that too far, and I was tyrannical at times. And I think many husbands can struggle that way, that they realize that, that we, that I have this responsibility to lead my family, but they end up taking that too far and being tyrannical and not looking on the other side and say, but yeah, that needs to be tempered by loving my wife and by loving my family. And so I think that's a problem that we are seeing, and I think going to see more and more as things go along, because it's such every time there's feminism and it's so widespread, but I think there's going to be a backlash against feminism. And I think we're seeing that now, is this backlash that's beginning to happen. But what we have to be careful of is not take it too far the other direction. Yeah. That men like you and I, who have a better understanding and wisdom, need to help the young men understand that it's much greater than just, you will do what I say.
Yes. Yeah, it's a loving, and when you hear words like rule, tyrant, and things like that, I mean, those are scary words. Yeah. And women, it's not that men and women are equal, but God has given man the authority, just as Christ is below God, the Father. There's that in the Trinity as well, but they're all equal. And then when you look at us, you have, the men, the woman, and then the children. If there's that, but the men are still submitting to God. We're still submitting to the Lord. They're submitting to us. So there's always a submission going on.
Yeah. I mean, within the Trinity, we have to, that's been for the past 2 or 3 years, that's been a really big discussion. Eternal submission has been a really big discussion, and we're not going to get into that.
Is that another podcast?
It may be a series of podcasts, but, because it is a nuance that is very nuanced and very detailed in understanding what's going on in the Trinity. But your premise that God designed it to be like your premise and which is correct, that ontologically we're equal, in substance we're equal, and so I need to understand that my wife is a joint heir, that she is just as much a firstborn son of God as I am as a Christian. But that God, because of order, God gave responsibilities and roles for order, for the purpose of order. And there's order in that responsibility as a man that I'm called to lead. I'm not called to dominate. I'm not called to be tyrannical. I'm not called to say my way or the highway. I'm called to lead with, in a loving way. And that is different. And it's not like I'm not. So the tension, as I love to say, the tension here is that, yes, I'm responsible. Like I'm responsible for my family. I'm responsible for my wife. I'm responsible. The tension is how do I live with her? On the other side of it is, how do I do that without being a dictator? Like I need to be without being a unkind dictator, And so I think I do think the best model is being a benevolent dictator, like she's my helpmate. And, like with Angie and I will tell you, I try to do what she wants as much as I can. Like I try to, and when it comes to the house, or when it comes to our family and the things that we do and how we live, I do my best to make her happy where I can. And she may disagree with me. She may be like, no, you don't do that. You think you do, but you don't. But I can hear her saying that.
That was a pretty good invitation.
Yeah. But in my mind, that's what I want to do. That's my hope, is to, as much as I possibly can, let her have what she wants. But as a leader, as the ultimate leader, there are certain things that, certain ways that I have to dictate. We're not going this direction. We're not going to do this thing, or we're not going to do it that way because it's not healthy, or it's not godly, or it's not whatever. And so there are times that I have to say, this is the direction we're going. But I need to do that. I need to do that and reserve that for those things that are incredibly important. And it's really the same thing as being an elder in the church. I don't want to be the guy that dictates everything. And so, I don't want to dictate, what songs we sing or what passage of scripture we read, or what certain things are going to look like. I mean, I know I have a responsibility to lead in those ways and to make sure that they're godly, but I don't want to flex my muscle unless I have to. I don't want to, my elder muscle, if you will. I don't want to do that. I think that, if people are called to submit to my leadership, I want to be a man who is going to, when I say that this is the direction we need to go, people trust me because they know that I have their best interest in mind. And it's not some arbitrary, just because of a personal preference that we're going this direction.
Yeah. Well, you're telling me it's time to go. So before we go, I'm just kidding. Before we go, you just mentioned the Trinity and all that going on. We're going to do some podcasts, but could you just give me a quick biblical definition of submission?
Well, I mean, literally lining up oneself up under authority.
Okay.
That is the biblical definition. So I think that part of that is an attitude, like it's an attitude of submission. I think it's a recognition of authority. So I'm recognizing that Christ is my authority. I'm recognizing that my husband is my authority. I'm recognizing in the church that my elders are my authority. I recognize that in terms of everyday life, the government, there's a role the government plays in terms of authority. It's submitting in those in their sphere of authority. I'm lining myself up under their authority. I'm recognizing it. I have an attitude of submission, and so it's interesting because even, like if the government said to go do something that you shouldn't do, that's sinful. As an example, if the government says you can't meet in the church, which we've been through that, but you can't meet, well, I need to obey God, not man, right? But I need to do it with an attitude of submissiveness. Like I want to submit to you. I mean, I think I said this earlier, but I want to submit to you, but I can't. Like I want you to, in order for me to submit to you, you have to be giving me commands that don't go against my Lord. Like I want to submit. I don't want to be in this position where you're going to throw me in jail. I will go to jail because I feel like I feel my responsibility is to the Lord, not to you in this situation. But your hope should be to see them change and do what they're supposed to do. That goes back to justice versus sanctification. Your hope is that in the case of the government, it's not so much sanctification, but well, I guess in a sense it is. But you want to see them obey God because you know that obeying God is going to be the best thing for the government. Right?
Yeah.
You want to see them obey God. And so your answer and your response should be to teach, to help them see that, you want to submit. I want to, when the officers come to your door and they say they're going to arrest you for, not, for meeting, it's like, okay, well, let me give you let me go ahead and put the handcuffs on, and where's the car at? Let me, I want to do this. Let's go. I mean, I'm ready. But that doesn't mean that obey the government when the government's outside of its sphere of authority.
That's a good definition. Okay, so if you see our wives come to church on Sunday with red dresses, then you understand what we're talking about here today. No, I'm kidding. But that's the red dress. If anybody who hadn't heard about that,
we addressed the red dress. We addressed the red dress.
Before we go, what is gnarly? You use the word gnarly a lot. Is that a 60s, 70s word?
Maybe. Probably
80s?
It's probably more 70s. But literally, have you ever, like an old root, like an old piece of wood that gets, that the grain is
yeah, like a root?
I think a root. But you see wood where the grain is going a lot of different directions.
Yeah.
And it has knots and things in it. That's gnarly. Like a cedar tree can be gnarly. Like the
okay.
Yeah.
Like a gnarly Christmas tree.
Yeah. So it's kind of I'm using it as an analogy for being kind of difficult.
It is a good word. You use that. You use it a lot. I don't know if it was an Arkansas thing or.
No, it's not an Arkansas thing. It may be California actually.
Yeah, it does sound like a surfer word almost.
Yeah.
Gnarly, dude.
That is what they say. Yeah, twisted trees and gnarly roots, kind of the idea there. But the informal that we use it for is difficult, dangerous, challenging. That's more where I'm at. Challenging. It's a challenging question.
Okay.
not just clear cut.
What was the gnarly part?
Well, the gnarly part is like how to respond.
Yeah.
The response of the woman. Like that's the difficult. That's the challenging part.
Yeah.
Like that's why I wanted to be very detailed in how I responded.
Who is the worst part of the deal? The husband loving the wife or the wife submitting to the husband?
Oh, I think it's equally tough.
They're both tough, yeah.
Yeah, because the husband, if he's going to truly love the wife, he has to lay down his life he has to be.
Yeah.
It's not just being willing to lay down your life. I mean, I think there is that, physical life even, but it literally is putting aside your own wants and desires to love your wife. And, if you, as an example, if you love to race cars or you love to play golf or you love to just have time to yourself, then you get married. You don't have that. I mean, loving your wife means that you may have to give those things up.
Yeah. That's the big thing about marriage I learned.
You've been listening to Fresh Bread, a podcast ministry of Grace Bible Church Gainesville. For more information, go to gracegainesville.org. And thanks for listening. Welcome to Fresh Bread, a podcast ministry of Grace Bible Church Gainesville with Pastor Brandon and Pastor Keith.